President's impact on the American Civil Rights Movement. President Dwight David Eisenhower's contribution to the Civil Rights Movement is significant in American history. President Eisenhower was a key figure in dealing with the effects of the Cold War in the 1950s. It was during this time that issues of civil rights became critical. However, fears of communist ideologies were associated with the civil rights movement. In this regard, President Eisenhower is attributed for not addressing civil rights during his tenure. In fact, historians associate Eisenhower with the violation of human liberties and suppression of the civil rights movement. However, Eisenhower's strategy to preserve individual freedom using modern republicanism was relatively effective. In this regard, Eisenhower introduced legislation that oversaw the expansion of Social Security. Eisenhower intended to ensure that the government was accountable to citizens' civil rights and liberties. However, President Eisenhower did not address racial discrimination during his tenure. For example, Eisenhower kept silent on matters that encouraged racial discrimination. For example, Eisenhower did not address racial segregation in schools. Nonetheless, Eisenhower used his office to encourage the civil rights movement. For example, he signed the first civil rights legislation that protected voting rights. Eisenhower was instrumental in dismantling racial segregation in federal facilities. Irrespective of his achievements, Eisenhower's influence on the civil rights movement was ineffective. On the other hand, President John Kennedy's assumption of office reignited the civil rights movement. Apparently, President Kennedy was elected to support equal rights in the United States. African Americans in the United States intensified the quest for equal rights during President Kennedy's tenure. Initially, President Kennedy was reluctant to support the right civil issues like integration. However, President Kennedy was instrumental in protecting black protesters in Alabama. In fact, Kennedy ensured the protection of the protesters through the federal marshals. Kennedy's efforts in ensuring that African Americans were admitted to the universities were effective. Between 1962 and 1963, President Kennedy ensured that African American students were admitted to public universities. In addition, the president introduced a civil rights bill to Congress that saw equal rights for all Americans. President Kennedy's passion for the civil rights movement resulted in his assassination in 1963 before the bill was introduced to Congress. However, the bill was later presented by his successor and signed into law. President Lyndon Johnson's ascendancy to power in 1963 caused jitters among African Americans. However, Lyndon utilized Kennedy's Bill of Civil Rights to build his political career. In this regard, President Lyndon continued to support the civil rights movement, especially in ending segregation. In fact, historians acknowledge Johnson's efforts in pushing for civil rights legislation. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was President Johnson's greatest achievement. The president introduced other major civil rights bills that gave African Americans the right to vote. During President Johnson's tenure, the situation in the United States changed since many African Americans got involved in political matters. In addition to civil rights, enormous gains were made in achieving other individual liberties. In this regard, the civil rights movement shifted its focus to end gender and sexual discrimination, poverty, and health problems. In conclusion, America's civil rights movement involved a great deal of effort from the presidents. However, President Kennedy's efforts in the civil rights movement were significant. The passion and sacrifice of President Kennedy gave the civil rights movement a new direction and purpose.